What if I told you that countries don't usually collapse because of wars, revolutions, or natural disasters, but because of something much quieter? Something that grows slowly, something most people ignore, something that feels normal until it's too late. That something is debt. And today, I want to walk you through how debt quietly destroys countries. Not all at once, not loudly, but patiently, step by step. I'm going to explain this in simple terms, with real-world examples, and I'll show you why this matters to you, even if you don't care about economics at all. Because this story isn't really about numbers, it's about power, control, and the slow erosion of a nation's future. Let me take you somewhere familiar. Imagine a normal household. A family earns $3,000 a month. At first, everything is fine. Rent is paid. Food is on the table. Life feels stable. Then one day, something unexpected happens. A medical bill, a car breaks down. So they take a loan. No big deal. Next month, they're short again. Another loan, then a credit card, then another card. Still nothing explodes. Life continues. Bills get paid. From the outside, everything looks normal. But something has changed. Now part of their income doesn't go to living anymore. It goes to interest. And that's where the trap begins, because countries work the same way. Most people think governments borrow money to build roads, hospitals, schools, or to protect citizens during crises. And sometimes that's true. But over time, debt stops being a tool and starts becoming a burden. At first, debt feels helpful. It gives governments flexibility. They can spend more than they earn. They can delay hard decisions. They can keep voters happy. But debt never forgets. And it always demands payment. Here's the key idea you need to understand. A country doesn't collapse when it has debt. It collapses when it can no longer control its debt. Because once debt grows faster than the economy, the government loses freedom. And when a government loses freedom, citizens pay the price. Let's talk about how this actually happens. Not dramatically, not overnight, but quietly. Stage 1 is easy borrowing. Global investors love lending money to countries, especially big ones. Governments are seen as safe. They can tax. They can print money. They rarely disappear, so lenders line up. Interest rates are low. Credit flows freely. Politicians borrow without fear. Why not? The consequences won't show up until later, long after the next election. Debt piles up slowly. No panic, no headlines, no alarm bells. Yet. Stage 2 is dependency. At some point, borrowing stops being about growth and starts being about survival. Instead of borrowing to build new infrastructure, governments borrow to pay old debts. Think about that for a second. They're not borrowing to move forward. They're borrowing just to stand still. This is when debt becomes structural. It's baked into the system. Budgets assume borrowing. Entire economies rely on rolling over old loans. And no one wants to be the first to admit there's a problem. Because admitting the problem means cutting spending, raising taxes, or both. And that's politically dangerous. So leaders delay. Again. Stage 3 is interest domination. This is the most dangerous phase and the least visible. Interest payments start consuming a huge portion of government revenue. Not schools, not healthcare, not infrastructure, just interest. In some countries, interest becomes one of the largest budget items. That means taxpayers are working not to improve their lives, but to pay lenders. This is where sovereignty begins to erode. Because once you owe too much, you no longer get to make your own rules. Let me make this concrete. When a country is drowning in debt, lenders start attaching conditions. You want another loan? Fine, but cut pensions. Reduce public wages. Sell national assets. Raise taxes. These decisions aren't made by citizens anymore. They're made by balance sheets. This is how financial power replaces democratic power. Without tanks, without soldiers, without violence. Just contracts. Now comes stage 4, austerity and stagnation. Governments cut spending to reassure markets. Social programs shrink. Public investment disappears. The economy slows. Unemployment rises. Wages stagnate. Public anger grows. Ironically, this makes the debt problem worse. Because when an economy slows, tax revenue falls. So the country borrows even more. It's a vicious loop. And once you're in it, getting out is incredibly hard. This is where many people ask, why don't countries just grow their way out of debt? Great question, because growth requires investment, and debt-heavy countries can't invest. They're too busy paying interest. At this point, something subtle but terrifying happens. The future gets mortgaged. Governments stop thinking long-term. Education, innovation, climate resilience, these become luxuries. Short-term survival becomes the only goal. That's how debt quietly steals decades from a nation, not by collapsing it, but by freezing it. Now let's talk about the final stage, the one everyone fears. Crisis. This can take many forms. A currency crash, a banking collapse, a sudden loss of investor confidence, sometimes all three. When trust disappears, everything moves fast. Interest rates spike, borrowing becomes impossible, the government panics, and suddenly the quiet problem becomes very loud. But here's the most important part of this story. By the time the crisis hits, the damage has already been done. The collapse isn't the disease, it's the symptom. You might be thinking, this sounds extreme. Surely big modern countries are safe. That's what people always think. Until they aren't. History is full of nations that believed they were immune. They weren't. And here's why this matters to you, because debt doesn't destroy countries evenly. It hits ordinary people first. Savings lose value, jobs disappear, public services vanish. The wealthy often escape. They move assets. They diversify. They hedge. Everyone else stays behind. Debt is silent, but deeply unequal. Let me say something uncomfortable. Debt is not just an economic issue, it's a moral one. When governments borrow irresponsibly, they're making promises on behalf of people who never agreed to them, and sometimes haven't even been born yet. Future generations inherit the bill, with no vote. Now, I want to be clear. Debt itself isn't evil. Used carefully, it can build prosperity. But when debt replaces discipline, when borrowing replaces reform, when delay replaces courage, that's when countries begin to decay. Quietly. So what's the real danger? It's not default. It's not headlines. It's not panic. The real danger is normalization. When massive debt feels ordinary. When trillion-dollar deficits barely raise eyebrows. When everyone assumes someone else will fix it later. That's how collapse becomes inevitable, without ever feeling urgent. Let me leave you with this thought. Countries don't fall apart because people don't care. They fall apart because the system makes consequences invisible, until they're unavoidable. Debt works in the shadows. It doesn't knock. It doesn't warn. It just waits. And by the time everyone finally notices, the options are gone. That's how debt quietly destroys countries, not with a bang, but with silence.